Future Commerce is brought to you by Octane AI. Let me ask you a question. Do you want to leverage more customer data and increase your revenue at your brand? The answer should be yes and yes. And with Octane AI, every Shopify and Shopify Plus merchant can do just that. Learn about your customers and collect buyer profile data with engaging quizzes and create personalized campaigns and flows using Facebook Messenger and SMS. Octane AI has plans for any sized business, and Future Commerce listeners get 10% off your first 6 months. So go sign up right now at octaneai.com/future. That's octaneai.com/future. Future Commerce is brought to you by ShipBob. Put your logistics on autopilot. Go to shipbob.com/futurecommerce and get started today with $500 in free shipping credits. Future Commerce is brought to you by Blue Shift. 77% of consumers make brand choices based on personalized experiences. Here's my question. Are they choosing you? Well, Blue Shift allows e-commerce companies to move from batch and blast and one-size-fits-all experiences to something much more custom. You can find out more today about what Blue Shift does for your brand at blueshift.com/futurecommerce. That's blueshift.com/futurecommerce.
Hello, and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast about next generation commerce. I'm Brian.
I'm Philip. Hey, we have my favorite newsletter author, Asia Singer, is here, and she authors the expertly written For the Love, and couldn't be more thrilled to have such an astute and established person join this show, because Lord knows we need some of that, because Brian and I don't bring that. Welcome to the show, Asia.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to have you. We're going to talk about all things content creation and media operation. It's something that Brian and I, we're trying to build for ourselves. But for those who don't know you, can you just give a little intro that's probably a little less of the self-aggrandizing that I've just done for you?
In terms of the newsletter, as you mentioned, it's called For the Love. It's about direct-to-consumer trends and branding, and I focus specifically on mission-driven companies. My background is in direct-to-consumer. I'm a creative director and a founder of brands, mostly in the fashion space, and currently working with direct-to-consumer brands, helping them identify, figure out their brand identity and with their content marketing.
Very cool.
Yeah. And you have you have the pedigree of some recognizable brands under your belt. These days you're helping a lot of different brands. What drew you to e-commerce and direct to consumer in the first place?
So I actually started my career in the fashion space in a very traditional business in wholesale, and realized how problematic it was not being able to communicate directly with your customer, and how the chain of command between the person creating product and the end user of the product was just so convoluted. And that really got me interested in direct consumer and being able to serve the end user of the product in an effective way.
That makes a lot of sense. And, Philip just mentioned kind of your pedigree and who you're working with now. So you're doing a lot of consulting now. How do you feel like that informs the content you write?
It definitely it definitely informs it, in that I'm having a lot of conversations with a lot of different founders, whether it's current clients or potential clients, and figuring out what their pain points are and where they need assistance and where they have questions. And the way I approach my writing and my newsletter is to create content that is useful for entrepreneurs and founders and marketers and people in branding, and to answer some of those questions that I and they have. So those, the many conversations I'm having with them are super helpful and inspiring newsletter content for sure.
Yeah, Phil and I just talking recently about sort of agencies and consulting and sort of the broad look it gives us into totally different industries and sectors, and access to brands, and just being able to sort of see a broader view of things, and it's really helped us be able to get a good sense of what's happening. Do you feel like that, like, sort of the broad nature of what you're doing now is giving you even more perspective than maybe when you're working for a specific brand? Or
100%. I totally agree with that. When I was working on my brand, I was very focused on that sector and that customer and that product. And while I was always researching and very curious and aware of what other people were doing, it's very different peering in from the outside versus having a conversation with someone on the inside of the business. Like, so many different target customers, so many different products, so many different use cases. And each one is individual, and each founder solves problems in different ways. So getting that sort of insider insight is invaluable. It makes it so much easier to identify trends.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah, you get this broad immersion into what I would say is like simultaneous inspiration that happens in our community. That things sort of like come online all around the same time. There's like multiple brands that are all launching similar products around the same time, and you always sort of wonder, like, wow, these all started their journey down this path around the same time many years ago, just to bring a product to market. It's so interesting to see that, and certainly the same happens in the tech implementer space. So we have this. That's a phenomenon that has just fascinated me for the longest time. I remember Elie Wiesel he had this quote: "I write to understand as much to be understood," and that's something that constantly comes to mind when we're writing pieces. We write 2 pieces a week at Future Commerce, and it's like a grind. Brian can attest.
It's a lot.
We've probably learned more in the last year, in writing with such frequency than we've learned in years of interviewing people on the podcast. Do you feel like, did you set out to achieve something in particular when you started writing the newsletter? Did you write for yourself? I'm curious how you sort of landed on For the Love as a way to express the things that were in your head.
Yeah, part of it was because I had previously been so heads down in my business and had all of these ideas and also questions that I wanted to dive into. And I wanted to get some practice writing. That was just a very sort of practical element of starting the newsletter. And the consistency of it was important, because I find it difficult to, and the accountability, I would say, too. Because if I were just deciding that I was going to set aside time to think deeply about these things for 6 hours or 12 hours, however long it takes me in the week, I would be much less likely to follow through on that if I didn't feel accountable to publish the newsletter.
I think that's so true. The discipline and sort of the schedule. So you write on a schedule as opposed to like kind of when you feel like it, or like.
Yes, I haven't been so good at it the past month, but in general, the weekly is the goal. And there are some incredible newsletters, some of my favorites, where the authors just publish when they feel they have something to say. And I find that really admirable. I just don't think I would do it.
Yeah. Yes. It's really hard because, you have to feel like you want to get it right. as opposed to complete it. And there's a real there's a real writer's challenge there. I guess that's the challenge pretty much when you're putting out anything, is like the done versus done well sort of conundrum. And when you're on a schedule, you just have to get it done.
I am totally a perfectionist, and I could work and rework something infinitely if given the opportunity. So
it's true. I feel the same. Or what happens is we work and work and work on something, and then I realize I kind of hate this now, and no one's going to see this. I've found every flaw there is to find. That means there's no work for anyone else left to do. I guess sort of subscribe to the ratatouille, sort of mentality around. You forgive me, I have 2 school-age kids, and so like my life is basically Pixar and Disney princesses. But there's sort of the mantra, anyone can cook, and that completely. I think that mindset that anybody can write, anybody can communicate, especially today when it's easier to try to connect to an audience with something like Substack than it has ever been. Really, it has everything to do with you just getting enough reps and having the accountability to keep producing the content to become good. And you become a prolific writer if you have enough at bats, if you will. Anyway, a lot of mixed metaphors there, but I think anybody really can. And it's interesting. How long have you been writing the newsletter? Because I feel like I only discovered it in the last 5 or 6 months.
Not so much longer than that. Maybe 8 months, something like that. And to your point about anyone being able to become a writer, I actually English was my worst subject in school and was convinced I was not a good writer. And so part of that, part of me deciding that I needed to get this practice was kind of overcoming that hurdle of thinking that I was not a superb writer. But it takes practice and sort of just taking that risk and leaping in. And for me, also leaving behind the ideas of what writing was in school, like in high school, the rules around how you write an essay and how you write your thoughts. For me, it works better just to write as I speak and think.
If English was your worst subject, I'm even more intimidated by you.
I actually, before I went into design and brand, I went to school for anatomy and cell biology. I was like all science and math, thought I was going to medical school, and very much missed being creative and kind of switched my path after my degree.
There's I love this the concept of like it really just has to come down to like there's various mediums, but just comes down to this thing Brian's been talking about quite a bit lately, which is discourse, and it's opening up a conversation. And there's something that I found in For the Love that I certainly have seen it in other publications. Another sort of like infrequent published publication, Chips and Dips, from Emily Singer's another one that I think is actually quite powerful in this way. You ask a lot of questions and you're not necessarily giving a lot of prescriptive advice. And that I feel like we have such an oversupply and an overabundance of prescriptive advice. Do this and X will, like do X and Y will happen. Increase your conversion rate. Focus on retention. And I feel like I don't get a lot of that in For the Love. It's more like exploring the why of something. Yeah, I guess, is that intentional? Is that something that you set out to do? Are you trying to be more prescriptive?
I don't think there is a right or wrong answer in strategy and brand. I think every company and every customer needs to be addressed in its own way. And so in the context of the topics that I am talking about, which is like strategy, brand, community, those types of things, I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. So I take the approach of, here's someone doing a particular thing very well. So how are they doing that? And what are some of the ways that could translate to other businesses? I think in those areas of a business, it's difficult to say this will convert in this exact way or this won't. And also the questions are because I am curious. I don't think of myself as the authority on all of these topics. I am trying to learn about them. And so I'm having these conversations and trying to convey that as best I can.
That's really interesting because I think it does sort of play into what Philip was sort of referring to before, which is discourse, and that is sort of it's sharing experience and sharing ideas, and being able to say, "Hey, this is what we've seen," or "This is the thought process that we've had," and being able to, or saying, "Hey, I'm seeing this in this situation. Like, what do you see about this situation?" And so, being able to express that it's part of discourse, is not just listening, but also sort of asking questions back and expressing ideas and sort of this back and forth. And so I think you do that really well, sort of to Philip's point, being able to not just say, hey, like this is what works, but hey, like this is something that we're seeing. What do you think about that and how it might apply to you? And I think that to Philip's point, like currently in D2C media, this often isn't the case, on Clubhouse and other places. It's a lot of like, hey, here's 15 tricks about how to get your business, going or to improve this particular part of it. And
there's a place for those things, right?
Yeah, there is.
We don't want to just dog on it, but yeah.
No, absolutely. I mentioned that at the end of the article where I talked about discourse, is like, hey, like there's practical side of this. Like you have targets to hit and you have to make your numbers, and sometimes you just need a way to get to the next number. But back to my point in sort of saying that is like D2C media is a funny place right now. And you're very much a part of it, Asia. What's your sort of take on D2C media right now? Like who's got interesting things to say? Who's being missed by the general crowds that's maybe not getting as much attention as they should get?
Yeah. I appreciate. Thank you for saying that I'm part of DTC media. I love that. That's great. To your earlier point, I agree, especially on Twitter. I find a lot of people make these kind of blanket statements, and because of the format of Twitter, you can get away with one authoritative sentence and nothing to back it up. And I often find that problematic, especially coming from people that maybe don't have the experience to inform those types of decisions. That being said, there are so many people that are sharing valuable things and work really hard to share valuable things. I think direct-to-consumer media, the direct-to-consumer space, is similar to many others where like it is often dominated by white men, and then there are also white women and less so people of color. I think a lot of work needs to be done sort of everywhere, not just direct to consumer. Twitter is interesting for me because I really didn't use it until around the time that I started my newsletter, and I had sort of an attitude about it where it was a place where there was a lot of negativity and just didn't seem interesting to me. And then once I started using it actively and connecting with people, I saw what an incredible resource it can be and how, this discourse can happen, and conversations have been sparked that have inspired my newsletter. and those kinds of things. And same with Clubhouse. Like it has its issues, but I have had some interesting conversations on there too. And I think this kind of broad access to knowledge is generally a great asset. I don't know if I answered your question.
Brian was trying to get you to name names, but I like the way that you approached the. I like the way that you like. Have you had media training? It's good. There's something to be said about the brands that you choose to spotlight. Recently, you covered Thousand Fell, which really stood out to me. I think within that same article, you had a mention of 4 Days, and 4 Days was a brand that we looked very closely at that came up repeatedly when we were doing our 9x9 brand study last year. What an exhaustive report that was too. And we had this whole, we created an algorithm and a scoring mechanism, looked at, over 280 brands. We wrote 81 pages of content around why these brands and why this list. And because who needs another top 10 list of brands that do random things? So we wanted there to be a purpose as to why we would even put this piece together. 4 Days barely fell off the list, but when you look at what the promise of 4 Days or Thousand Fell is, there's a hidden challenge in there. Like you could be if you were reductive on Twitter, you could say, oh, well, you just need to have a closed loop supply chain and just make products that are in a circular economy. That's what customers want. That's all. Oh, is that all? Oh, it's actually like an insane amount of innovation on the product side and in the supply chain to actually enable that. And I think it can be super reductive to say, well, why don't you just create a resale marketplace? That's easy, right? And that's where I think some of the actually celebrating the achievements of what brands like this have done, like it just falls to the wayside of it's actually insanely difficult to do what they're purporting that they do. And it gets reduced down to a tweet, right? It's so that's a thing that I think you do really well in the newsletter is sort of explain the why. Or maybe I'm sort of teeing you up to maybe talk a little bit more in depth about that in that interview that was on with Thousand Fell.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I don't even have the bandwidth to dive into all of the things that deserve to be talked about, like even the logistics of figuring out how to get product to customers is one thing. And then how do you get it back? How do you recycle it? How do you, there's so many steps to that process and so much complexity that it is not helpful to tell a company you should do this. And something that I love about Thousand Fell and what's really interesting to me is that they are developing, they're working through that supply chain and trying to help the intention is to help other brands do it as well. And I find that really interesting, like Allbirds developing these new materials and allowing other brands to access that technology. I think, especially in this space of sustainability, thinking about it more broadly and not just within the confines of how do I do this for my brand and my customer and just move myself forward and our company forward. How do we do that in a broader way? And it goes along with another thing that I talk about a lot and I'm really interested in, which is community building and how do we create these connections and move society forward in a way that is positive and not only for the purpose of profit. And, I get very excited when I see companies doing that.
Hey, Philip here to tell you about our newest sponsor, Octane AI. If you are on Shopify or Shopify Plus, and who isn't, am I right? Then you need what Octane AI has to offer. I am a huge fan of guided selling, and Octane AI has tools that allow you to get to know your customers on a deeper level and collect more buyer profile data. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you can use things like shop quizzes, Facebook Messenger, SMS, and opt-in tools to allow you to engage your customer more personally so you can get on their level. More personalized campaigns and flows across all channel means more ROI. And that ROI that is driven from Octane AI is usable in other platforms with their integrations to other tools you're already using. Brands have already seen incredible results, up to 16x increase in email signups and a 28% increase in AOV. That's average order value, money in your pocket. What are you waiting for? Octane AI has plans for any sized business, and Future Commerce listeners get 10% off the first 6 months when you sign up. So why don't you sign up today? Go to octaneai.com/future. Once again, that's octaneai.com/future and tell them Philip sent you. Hey, I just want to jump in here and tell you about our new partner, ShipBob. Let me ask you a question. Do you want to grow your e-commerce business by 1,200%? Well, of course you do. But before you tell me that that's impossible, let me tell you about ShipBob. They are a premium 3PL that offers a global fulfillment network, best-in-class technology, and reliable customer support. And here's a real-life merchant story. When Andrea Lisbona, the founder and CEO of the hand sanitizer brand Touchland, partnered with ShipBob, she was amazed by how fast and seamless ShipBob's pick, pack, and ship process really is, even as her business grew 1,200% in a matter of weeks. So outsource fulfillment to ShipBob and watch your business grow in a scalable way. Go to shipbob.com/futurecommerce to get started with $500 in free shipping credits. That's shipbob.com/futurecommerce and get started today. It's time once again for me to tell you about our newest partner, Blue Shift. Channel centric? Siloed? Batch and blast? One size fits all? These are the words no marketer likes to use and no campaign that your customers want to be a part of. So why do these campaigns still happen? Why? Well, disconnected data and disjointed technology. Blue Shift's Smart Hub CDP connects data and creates personalized omni-channel experiences for leading brands like James Allen and CarParts.com. Blue Shift provides catalogs for AI-driven product recommendations, advanced predictive segmentation capabilities, and creates custom audiences for your first-party data to leverage across almost any media platform so that you, the marketer, can make batch and blast a thing of the past. Learn more at blueshift.com/futurecommerce and get your copy of the Smart Guide to Product Recommendations for e-commerce and retail for free. That's right. Go to blueshift.com/futurecommerce.
So do we. I think it would be really interesting. I'd love to hear a little more about your thoughts on community. And with that, maybe it sounds like that's a theme that you explore when you go, feature a company in For the Love. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about your process for like what you're looking to do when you engage with someone that you want to feature. Like, what does that process look like? What are some of the markers that you're looking to highlight? Like, how do you go about creating this amazing content that you create?
So sometimes it'll just be, I think this brand is interesting. I want to talk to the founder. and
Nice.
That it's a super open-ended conversation. And, I kind of then through asking questions and learning about their business, see what part of it could be interesting or helpful. I try to ask questions through the lens of like, how could this be useful for my readers who are founders in the venture capital space, in branding and in marketing. So I try and get information. For instance, let's take community. As you said, on Twitter, you could be I could be, sort of very blunt about it and say, yes, every brand needs community, but that's not helpful to anyone. Then the question is, how do you build community? Why should people come here? How do I make a space that people want to engage with and will be excited to be part of? So those are the questions I try and ask, something that's a little more tactical and how did you do this, and how do you think other people could do it as well, and why do you think this is working?
It's really good.
And what's great is this, it comes from a place of experience, and that your own experiences are informing the way that you're I don't want to say critiquing, but the way that you're examining these, why the sort of the why a brand should exist, or what, again, coming back to the series that Brian's been writing about in Future Commerce Insiders, which is the sort of philosophy and psychology of a brand, and sort of the philosophical implications of the answering the why something should exist. And so what about your own experience, or like, let's say, in your past life and working as an operator in direct to consumer, is there an element of you writing for who that person was, who Asia was then, and sort of the thing that you felt like would have been necessary, or something you would have told yourself in that place, or is that too existential?
No, it's totally accurate. I feel like a lot of the information available about direct-to-consumer companies is around fundraising, and you can find the playbook for, how to go about fundraising, who to reach out to, and that kind of storyline is told again and again. But as far as sort of more tactical information and deeper information, it's not readily available, and would have been very useful for me at that time. And I think another thing is that I came from a small company with a very small team, so I had experience in a lot of areas of the business and had my hands in every area of the business, so that has made it easier for me to ask the right questions, to understand how certain things impact other areas of the business, and what is actually impactful.
That spurs another line of thinking for me. Philip, go ahead and ask your follow-up question. I'll pursue this next thread after you're done.
I was going to switch gears and just ask,
okay.
like, if you have all of those, if now you have this experience where it's not, you've been in a lot of roles as an operator and at a brand. You've worn a lot of different hats, so to speak. Now you have the benefit through a consulting lens to see a bunch of different brands. I'm curious if there's, something that you see, there's like mistakes or like blind spots. That's the word I'm looking for. Like blind spots that you see that you immediately go to try to help other brands and operators avoid. Like what are some of those things that you look for? What are things they find are pretty challenging for brands today that are a commonality or like a common denominator across all of them?
Well, I think firstly, when you are a founder or part of, a small startup, it can be very myopic. Like, you are thinking very specifically about your business and your customer, and it's incredibly helpful to have insights from other brands. So I think, that alone was certainly a blind spot of mine, and I think probably a lot of other, early stage founders. And then a lot of the work that I do now is really defining who the customer is, and defining very clearly how what the problem you're solving and how you are solving it, and then translating that into every sort of outward facing element of the brand. And I think, again, when it is kind of your baby, you have this specific idea of what you think it should be, and what you what you want it to be. And, sometimes the customer that you think you have is not the actual customer that you do have. So it's helpful. It's helpful to have someone like myself or another consultant to come in and kind of bring that outward facing perspective. So
validate assumptions and challenge preconceived notions, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of what people are looking for with fundraising. Interesting. I was going to ask a really similar question, Philip, but sort of the flip side of that. So you're getting a really broad perspective. As you were talking just a few minutes ago, I started to think like you have a really interesting spot that you're in, because I think you've been out on sort of the front line of commerce, having had, been a part of a really small brand and having, this broad view now of many brands and sort of with the profiles that they do. Innovation is a word that was pretty hot for a while. And obviously this is future commerce. We talk a lot about what is next and what's coming and like where things are headed. And so oftentimes, I think about people that are going to go to fundraise and what they say differentiates their brands and why they should be invested in. And I would be curious what you feel like actual, like meaningful, like next steps are for brands right now. Like, where are things headed? Is it, I think we see a lot of like similar aesthetics these days, and there's some clear trends there. And is that actually innovation? Like, what actually sets a brand apart, and what will set a brand apart coming up?
Yeah, this is a great question, and something I think about a lot, because I actually love being a founder and starting a business. So I'm like always sort of curious as to what maybe my next business would be. And I agree, like something needs to be meaningfully different to be relevant. Like I don't want to spend my time building something that is just another product that maybe looks a little different. So I think, we spoke before about material innovation and supply chain innovation. Those, I think, are meaningful things. Or a product that, is either different from what's out there or more accessible. Something that's very interesting to me is that there are so many great, especially food and beverage brands right now, and so many really inspiring direct-to-consumer brands that are all kind of vying for the same customer and are all around the same price point. And something that would be interesting to me is a brand that is more accessible to a larger population of people.
Yes.
The people that are underserved, and especially when it comes to food, I never see commercials anymore. So I don't know why I saw a commercial the other day, but it was for McDonald's, and a full Happy Meal was like $4. And I was like, you can buy 2 apples for $4? Like, how do we get better product and more nutritional product to people at that price point? And like that is a huge problem to be solved, and in so many different ways. So that's another area that I'm thinking about.
I think that's really, really insightful, and especially like in the place that we're in right now. Coming out of the pandemic, or hopefully coming out of the pandemic, it looks like my state might head back. We're backsliding right now, potentially. Hopefully not, but coming out of the pandemic, we've been looking at this case-shaped recovery, and it's something we've talked about significantly. What that means for experiences and products and brands right now is that I think there's a lot of stuff that's targeting sort of the upper end of the middle. and a lot of innovation has happened there. A lot of, over the past 5 years, especially in D2C. Looking at brands like Parade, who we had on the show not long ago, who are like calling themselves D2C 3.0 or whatever that means. I'm still figuring that out. But I think that what I really, really liked about Parade, and I'm really interested in, is making sort of the sort of premium brands that we've seen in past be more accessible to a broader audience, price point wise. And I think so. I do believe that you're absolutely on something right now for the next wave of innovation in D2C. It's broad market appeal. I think that's huge.
It's the mall brand, right? It's the resurgence of the mall brand. If Parade had been launched, if Cami and Jack had launched Parade in 1992, it would be Wet Seal. And I mean, now they'll tell you that the story is fabric platform, Lululemon, overseas ship. Like there's a lot of interesting ways that they've sort of positioned the brand that I think it is actually pretty interesting. But at the end of the day, it's like affordable intimates with inclusive sizing and incredible inclusive marketing, and really, I think, differential influencer strategy. I think those are the things that are the people, like people are seeing those things and not the fabric innovation. Right. That's the thing that they're gleaming onto. Is like, oh, I can afford this. I mean, I don't know if, $40 for 4 pairs of underwear is affordable, but it's more affordable than what we've seen from, the likes of, say, like Lively. So it's definitely heading in a certain direction. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Asia.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's also, we are now seeing, Gen Z founders, these, how old is Cami? Like
23 or 24
in her early 20s. And I think there is a real desire to make things that their people's friends and contemporaries can actually buy. and accessibility is much more a priority now. I mean, even on the most superficial level, you take the millennial Instagram aesthetic, which is very polished and aspirational, versus TikTok, which is just realistic and sometimes sort of ugly. And I think that mindset translates in a lot of ways where it's like more realism is what people are looking for now and what people want. And it's not cool to spend more money than you have just to look like you have it, whereas 10 years ago, like that was the goal.
Well, that's to your point, Asia, too, is that, like, is the millennial Henry really really to be considered a high earner when they're spending $40 on truffle hot sauce and $350 on candles? Like at it's like you're basically in, like, you're back in the lower middle class in the way that the direct to consumer spending has co-opted most of your income, which is, I think, itself, it's like a whole other topic of conversation.
This is worth an article.
No, I agree, and I think, I don't know if I read this or it was part of a conversation, like part of that is that a lot of millennials have decided that homeownership is just not even nearly attainable and are not saving for those types of things. So, like, you might as well spend money on things that you can actually enjoy and purchase, which makes a lot of sense. But, I guess
Dogecoin.
Right. Yes, exactly. But I guess what makes more sense is, can we provide premium product to people without a premium price tag? And I think that was the original intention of direct to consumer. And then when digital advertising became less affordable, that dream kind of drifted away, and founders are sort of re-looking at how to solve that problem now.
Isn't it so funny that it's something I've said on Twitter a lot, but I don't know if I've ever said it on the show. Brian, correct me. The original promise of e-commerce and direct to consumer in the early aughts was, like, products cost more because there's so many middlemen, right? And it's like, we're removing the middleman. which like made so much sense to a consumer. It's like, well, we ship direct from the factory. Like we don't go through distributors, it doesn't have to go through a retailer. There's not people adding margin along the way. It's a more efficient way of doing business. So we pass the savings to the customer. E-commerce in the 2020s is literal only middlemen. Like that's the whole story. Like Shopify middleman, Stripe middleman, 4 layers of shipping labels, shipping rates. The carrier is like only middlemen all the way down. It's kind of fascinating.
So instead of like 3, we'll have like 100.
Yeah. There's actually more middlemen. Now people are saying like retail stores are it's the better way to go. Like if you like watch any of these people on Twitter and they've come all the way around to like, no, wholesale is where it's at. Wholesale strategy is where it's at. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, I feel like the Warby Parker guys at the beginning was like, we would never have a brick and mortar. That's like ridiculous. And then, they were kind of the first to be like, maybe we'll give this a try, but it's marketing, it's, and it is framing things through a different lens, and things have changed a lot since, traditional retail and traditional brick and mortar were successful. And we've seen a lot of businesses go bankrupt, not necessarily entirely because of the pandemic. So like this shift is necessary, but again, it's like, it's not being prescriptive. Like no one has the answer. Everyone is trying things out and figuring out what works for them.
There's this criticism that was leveled at Google for the first 10 years, which is, every Google product had beta on it. I don't know if you remember that era. I'm old enough to remember everything, like even Google search was beta. And for a modern enterprise, in back in those days, it was like, well, we don't use Google anything because it's not a real product yet. They're still a startup. How can we rely upon it if it's a startup? Right. And I think like startups have become so pervasive and certainly world changing in the world of tech that we forget for a second that, well, Away is a startup and Outdoor Voices is a startup. And like these are startups. And it's really hard to depend on them when they haven't really come, for all intents and purposes, out of beta yet. They're still finding product market fit. They're still finding the message that resonates, and what works today may not work tomorrow. And for a consumer who puts their trust in a particular brand or product, maybe it helps to remind yourself from time to time, hey, this company's been in business for 3 years. Like they're still figuring some things out too.
Yeah, I think all the marketing and spending behind them sometimes convinces consumers that it is a well-oiled machine when in fact it is not yet. But power to them for making people believe that.
It's funny when you speak, Brian, there's a pretty stark contrast between a founder that we'll have on the show that's just come out of fundraising mode and how aspirational they speak and how large the opportunity is, to the bootstrapped founder. Right. And they're very extremely pragmatic, and it's all about slow and taking their time. And there's no bombast to it. It's actually quite, if anything, you want them to be a little more, you want them to be a little more, optimistic about, the trajectory of the business. And I think that's just like you said, Asia, part and parcel of sort of the way that finance and capital has sort of shaped the way that this industry has sort of become. Brian, sorry, you were about to say, and I had cut you off.
No, I have no idea. Oh, that was a really good
comment. Asia, I'd love to bring you back on the show for just a normal sort of news roundup episode. I'd love your perspective on the world around us. What's the things that's caught your eye recently? Anything that you're keeping an eye on? Do you own any Dogecoin? What are the things that you're thinking about as you write your next issue For the Love?
Well, there has been so much discourse around the new Roaring 20s. And so I don't have any answers on this yet, but I have been thinking about how that translates to branding specifically and how maybe aesthetics will be moving forward after this time of sort of seriousness. And as I said, community is consistently interesting. I was speaking to this founder the other day, and an upcoming article will be kind of about all of the ways that she has really integrated customers into her business and how they have become employees and have informed so many parts of the business. And that is super interesting to me, and very much in the price mindset. I'm really looking for companies that are targeting a different type of customer and what that looks like and how they do it. So those are some things that are on my mind right there.
Where can people subscribe to the newsletter?
At asiasinger.substack.com.
Cool. We'll link it up in the show notes as well. Such a joy to have you on the show. Thank you for
Absolutely
joining us.
It's fun.
We promised we would team up. It only took 3 months to happen, but we finally got it on the books, and I hope it doesn't take another 3 months to get you back on again.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much, Asia. Thanks for listening to Future Commerce. Remember, you can get this wherever podcasts are found. More episodes of this show and our sister show, Stairway to CEO, are found at futurecommerce.fm. And would you take 2 seconds? It'll take 2 seconds, I promise. And give us a 5-star on iTunes and leave us a review. That'll help us out and help more people find the show. And we got our new quarterly report coming out in partnership with Gladly and Stella Connect. It's called Services: The New Storefront. It'll be out in about a week's time. And hey, how can you get on the list to make sure you're the first to get it? Go to futurecommerce.fm/subscribe and sign up for notifications so that you don't miss when our new research drops. Thank you for listening to Future Commerce, and we'll see you next time.